My daughter thinks I embarrassed her every day of her life. She stood in front of 500 people at her college graduation and proved that the embarrassment ran in one direction only, and it was not mine. I need to tell you something before I get to what happened at that ceremony, because if I jump straight to the moment she picked up those clippers and pressed them against my skull in front of every faculty member, every proud parent, every dean and trustee who had traveled to be there, you will think I am exaggerating. You will think no daughter actually does that to her mother. And I want you to have no doubts at all, because what I said into that microphone afterward is the thing my family still cannot forgive me for. Some of them say I went too far. After everything you are about to hear, I genuinely want to know what you think. My name is Nora Scott. I am 41 years old. I have spent the last decade being the family member everyone pitied, tolerated, and quietly talked about at the table when they thought I was in the kitchen. My daughter Celeste is 22. She is biologically mine. I carried her. I raised her. I attended every recital and every parent-teacher conference alone after her father left when she was 4. We are not connected by anything except blood and 18 years of my life given freely. That is what makes this story so hard to tell without my voice going flat. Let me take you back to how we got here, because the graduation was not the beginning. The graduation was just the day she finally ran out of room to hide who she had become. I grew up in a family that measured love in the form of opinion. My mother, Dolores Scott, had a comment for every choice I made, and those comments always contained the word should. You should go back to school. You should dress better. You should stop dreaming so big, Nora, because big dreams are how people get humiliated. My mother had worked as an office administrator for the same law firm for 29 years, and she believed that stability was the highest virtue a woman could demonstrate. She was not a cruel woman. She was a frightened one. But fear looks a lot like cruelty when it is aimed at someone who is trying to grow. My older sister, Renata Scott, same blood, same house, same mother, had chosen differently. She married a man named Douglas Ferreira when she was 26. Douglas sold commercial insurance and coached his son's baseball team and drove a Lexus SUV, and Renata used him like a credential. If she was in the conversation and the topic was money or success or ambition, Douglas's income eventually surfaced. She could not help it. It was the way she kept score. I do not hate Renata. I understand Renata. But understanding something and being comfortable around it are different things. Celeste grew up in the overlap of those two women. She heard her grandmother's worried clucking and her aunt's quiet competitions, and somewhere in those years she decided that I, her mother, the one who drove a used sedan and worked remotely and did not have a husband to mention, was something to be managed rather than celebrated. I watched it happen in stages, the way erosion works. Slow and invisible until the cliff edge appears. The first time I noticed it clearly, Celeste was 16. Her school held a career day in the gymnasium. Parents were invited to set up small tables and talk about their work. I had been doing real estate investment consulting for 4 years by then, quietly, without anyone in the family knowing the full scope of it. My primary client was a regional development group out of Charlotte, and I had helped them position 3 acquisition targets that year. The work was not glamorous. There was no fancy office, no business cards with embossed logos. I worked from a desk in my spare room and took calls in my car when Celeste was home, because I was not ready for the questions. I set up my table. I had a simple printed sign that said Real Estate Consulting. The parent 2 tables down was a pediatric surgeon. The one beside me was a television news anchor. Celeste came through with her friend group and stopped at the surgeon's table for 7 minutes. I counted. She stopped at the anchor's table for 5. She walked past my table without pausing. Not a glance. When I mentioned it that evening, gently, no accusation in my voice, she said, "Mom, what was I supposed to say? That my mom works on the phone?" She was not being vicious. She genuinely thought that was a fair description. I did not correct her. That evening, I reviewed the draft terms on a $37,000 advisory fee that had just come through. The second incident that stuck happened the Christmas Celeste was 18, the winter before she started college. My mother hosted dinner. Renata brought her famous sweet potato casserole, and Douglas brought a bottle of wine and the information that he had been promoted to regional director. There was a round of congratulations. My mother squeezed his arm. Renata caught my eye across the table with an expression that was not unkind, just satisfied. I smiled back. Later, after the dishes, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. She pressed both my hands between hers and said, very sincerely, "Nora, I know the consulting is something you believe in. But Douglas has a contact at a corporate relocation firm. They're always hiring. Benefits, stability. Would you just think about it?" I told her I would think about it. That was the honest answer in the most technical sense. I had been thinking about it in the way that a person thinks about a door they have already walked through and closed behind them. 2 weeks earlier, I had signed as a limited partner in an investment property in Raleigh worth $420,000. It was my second property interest in 14 months. I smiled at my mother and told her Douglas was very kind to think of me. The third incident was the one that showed me Celeste had started making choices, not just absorbing them. She was 19 and home for spring break. A college friend called while I was in the next room, and Celeste described my work as like a side hustle, kind of freelance, nothing specific. I heard every word. She was not on speakerphone. She was not trying to be overheard. She simply did not think it mattered whether I heard or not. If you have ever been counted out by someone who was supposed to be in your corner, you know exactly what that silence feels like. Not the silence in the room. The silence inside yourself, where the anger goes when you decide it is not time yet. I did not walk into that room and confront her. I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and sent a follow-up message to my financial advisor, Quame Osei, confirming the additional contribution I had been considering for Celeste's education fund. $65,000, growing quietly in a 529 account that I had opened before she started kindergarten. I had been the only one funding it. I had never mentioned it to anyone in my family because there had never been an occasion that felt right. I confirmed the contribution. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed. But the thing about secrets is, the longer you keep them, the bigger the explosion. In the 18 months before Celeste's graduation, I had been building something that had nothing to do with secrets and everything to do with patience. My consulting work had expanded past the Charlotte group. I had three active clients, one in real estate acquisition, one in commercial property management, and one that was a private family office based in Atlanta that I cannot name, but whose annual retainer alone covered my mortgage and utilities with room to spare. I was not a millionaire. I was not trying to be. What I was doing was constructing a foundation that no one in my family could see because no one in my family had ever looked carefully enough to notice the foundation I was standing on. My attorney was a woman named Ingrid M. Wangi. I had found her through a referral from Quame, and she was the kind of attorney who did not waste syllables. I had gone to her 18 months before the graduation, specifically in October, for an initial consultation about estate planning and financial documentation. I was 40 years old. Celeste would turn 22 in the spring. My assets had reached a point where informal arrangements were no longer sufficient. Ingrid listened to everything I described, asked four pointed questions, and told me that the most important thing I could do was establish clear ownership documentation on every asset before any family dynamics shifted. I did not tell her about Renata, or my mother, or the fact that Celeste had once described my work as a side hustle. Those details were not relevant to the documents. What was relevant was that I owned a 40% partnership interest in the Raleigh property, had a 23% stake in a second commercial property in Greensboro, acquired 11 months later, and held a consulting contract that Ingrid described as unusually well structured for a solo practitioner. She told me to have everything reviewed and properly titled before the new year. I told her I would have it done by December. I had it done by November 15th. The first time my family almost found out the full picture was at Celeste's 21st birthday dinner. Renata had organized it, a private room at a restaurant called Harlow in downtown Charlotte, 10 guests, a prix-fixe menu, and Renata at the head of the table because she had made the reservation. I arrived with a small wrapped gift, a card, and the awareness that Quame had sent me a quarterly summary that morning showing the Greensboro property up considerably in assessed value. Douglas, seated across from me, had recently discovered that I sometimes consulted for real estate groups, and he had decided this was an opening for mentorship. He leaned toward me during the appetizer course and said, "You know, if you ever wanted to get into something more stable, commercial insurance actually touches a lot of those same relationships. I could make an introduction." I looked at him. He was smiling the way people smile when they believe they are being generous. "That's very thoughtful," I told him. "Douglas knows everyone in commercial lines," Renata added, in the tone she used when she was repeating something she had already said at home and was now delivering for a wider audience. "He could genuinely open doors for you." From down the table, my mother nodded. It was a small nod, the kind that said she agreed and was relieved someone had finally said it. Celeste was watching me. She had her chin in her hand and she was watching me the way a person watches a situation they have mentally excused themselves from. Not cruel, just elsewhere. I smiled at Douglas. "I appreciate it. I've actually been fairly busy lately." "Doing what specifically?" he asked, not unkindly. He genuinely did not know because I had never told him. "Consulting on a couple of property acquisitions," I said. "Keeps me occupied." Renata glanced at Douglas. He glanced back. That glance was the full extent of what they thought of my work. A small, polite pause before the conversation moved on to something they considered more substantial. What almost surfaced that night was the quarterly summary still open on my phone. Quame's message contained a projected annual income figure that would have changed the entire temperature of that dinner table in 30 seconds. I had set my phone face down when I sat. I left it face down all evening. It was not a decision that cost me anything. I had learned that the right moment to speak is not the moment when you want to speak. It is the moment when speaking actually changes something real. After dinner, I drove home, drafted a follow-up question for Ingrid about the timeline for formalizing a specific clause in my estate documents, and sent it at 10:47 that evening. She responded the next morning with a three-line answer that confirmed we were on track. The second close call came 4 months before the graduation, in January. Celeste was home for winter break and she was filling out a financial aid form for a graduate school program she was considering, not committing to, just exploring. She called me into her room and held out the laptop. "It's asking for parental income and assets," she said. "Can you just tell me what to put?" I sat beside her on the edge of the bed. I looked at the form. It was asking for adjusted gross income, which I was comfortable disclosing. It was also asking for investment property and partnership interests, which was the part that required care. "I'll help you fill it out," I told her, "but I want to go through it properly. Can you give me a day to pull the right numbers?" She sighed, not unkindly, just impatiently, the way young people sigh when something takes longer than they expected. "I just need a ballpark, Mom. It's not a tax return." "I know," I said, "but I want to be accurate." "Can I sit with you tomorrow and we'll do it together?" She agreed, a little reluctantly. I spent that evening reviewing the asset categories with Ingrid's guidance via email. We completed the form together the next afternoon. The income section was straightforward. For the investment category, we reported the partnership interests accurately, which required Celeste to see a number she had not expected. She looked at the screen for a moment, then she looked at me. "Is this right?" she asked. "Yes," I told her. She turned back to the screen. She did not ask any further questions, and I did not offer any explanation. But something changed in her expression, something that flickered and then went carefully neutral. I noticed it. I stored it. I did not know yet what she would do with that information. 3 months later, I would understand. Everything I had built, every document, every asset, every conversation with Ingrid and Quame, every year of quiet, strategic work done in a spare room while my family counted me out, was about to be tested in a room full of 500 people who had no idea they were about to witness the worst decision my daughter had ever made. The graduation was scheduled for the second Saturday in May, at 11 in the morning, on the outdoor lawn of Celeste's University. I had known the date for 7 months. I had blocked the whole weekend in my calendar, arranged for Quame to handle any time-sensitive items on my end, and bought a dress in March, a simple navy wrap dress that cost more than I usually spent on myself, because I wanted to look like what I was, a mother who had given everything and arrived to watch the result walk across a stage. I drove up the night before and stayed in a hotel 12 minutes from campus. I had dinner alone at the hotel restaurant, reviewed a few pending documents on my laptop, and went to bed at 10. I was not nervous, I was proud. Whatever Celeste and I had been navigating in the months since the financial aid form, the careful silences, the rearranged conversations, none of that was stronger than what I felt when I thought about watching her receive that diploma. I had decided that before I left home. Renata had also driven up. She and Douglas were staying at a nicer hotel closer to the campus center. My mother had flown in from Charlotte and was staying with a college friend of hers who lived in the area. The plan was for all of us to meet outside the venue gates at 10:15, find seats together, and celebrate afterward at a lunch reservation Renata had made. I arrived at 10:08. The lawn was already filling. Rows of white folding chairs stretched across the grass in long, careful arcs, and the stage at the front was draped in the school colors. Parents were everywhere, some in heels sinking slightly into the turf, some carrying flowers, some already in tears before anything had even started. I found the row Renata had identified and sat near the aisle. My mother arrived at 10:20. She was wearing a coral blazer and she hugged me warmly and patted my shoulder and said that she could not believe her granddaughter was graduating. I told her I could not either. It was a genuine moment between us. My mother, despite everything, loved Celeste fiercely, and that love had never been in question. Renata and Douglas arrived at 10:28. Renata kissed my cheek. Douglas squeezed my arm and said, "Big day." I nodded. We sat in a row, my mother, then Renata, then Douglas, then me, an empty seat at the end where Renata had placed a program for a cousin who was parking. What I did not know, what none of us sitting in that row knew, was that Celeste had arrived at the venue 90 minutes earlier. She had been in the staging area with her graduating class, and at some point in those 90 minutes, she had made a decision. I would not learn the full shape of that decision until it was already happening. The ceremony started on time. The dean welcomed the crowd. A faculty member gave remarks. The student speaker, not Celeste, gave a short address about resilience and new beginnings. Around me, people applauded, took photographs, dabbed at their eyes. I had my phone camera ready. The graduate procession began at 11:22. The graduates filed out in alphabetical order, which meant Celeste would appear somewhere in the first third. When I saw her, I raised my phone and kept my eyes on her face. She looked beautiful. She had her hair pinned up under her cap and she was walking with two friends from her program, all three of them laughing at something. She scanned the seated rows as she walked, looking for our section. She found my mother first. My mother was waving a small program in the air, and she smiled and pointed at us. She did not look at me. That is the part I keep returning to even now. In that single sweeping look across the seats, she found her grandmother and her aunt and her uncle by marriage. She did not look for me, or she looked and moved on so quickly it registered as the same thing. I told myself it was the distance, the crowd, the sun in her eyes. I lowered my phone slightly, held it there. The ceremony continued for another 38 minutes before they began calling names for diplomas. Celeste's name would come early. I had my camera ready again. I was composed. I was in that particular emotional state where you hold everything steady because you know that in a few minutes you are going to cry regardless, and you would prefer to cry at the actual moment rather than spend 20 minutes beforehand leaking. What happened next did not have a preamble. There was no build-up that I could see coming. The diploma walk had started and the second row of graduates had been called to form a loose line at the side of the stage when Celeste broke away from her group and walked, not toward the stage, but toward the seated section. Toward our row. I thought she was coming to say something to my mother. A quick word before her name was called. Daughters do that sometimes. She was not. She was carrying something in her right hand. I registered it as an object before I registered what it was. Small, black, cordless. The kind you see in a barber shop. Everything that followed happened in approximately 90 seconds, and I have never in my life experienced time move so strangely. She stopped at my seat. She was smiling, and the smile was the thing I could not process, because it was not the smile of a person who was playing a prank or being spontaneous. It was the smile of a person who had planned something and was now executing it. Controlled, almost clinical. Mom, she said, loudly enough that the people in the three rows around us turned to look, you've been embarrassing me for my entire life. I figured it was time I returned the favor. Before I could respond, before anyone in our row could respond, she turned on the clippers. The sound was a flat mechanical buzz. She pressed them to the left side of my head, just above my ear, and she pulled them upward in a single clean stroke. My mother made a sound I have never heard from her before or since. Renata grabbed her own forearm, both hands, and held on. I did not move. I sat perfectly still. And I want to be honest about why. It was not courage in that moment, it was shock. The kind that shuts the body down for 2 full seconds while the brain tries to understand what is happening. I felt the vibration against my skull. I felt the air on the patch of skin she had just exposed. I felt abstractly that something had changed in an irreversible way, not just my hair. She made a second pass. She said, "You deserve this for always embarrassing me." She was laughing. An actual laugh, bright and easy, like she was pleased with herself. I stood up. She took a step back, still holding the clippers, still smiling. A few people in the nearby rows were on their feet. A faculty volunteer in a yellow vest was moving quickly down the aisle. My mother was saying Celeste's name in a low, repetitive way that sounded more like a prayer than a word. Douglas was looking at the stage. Not at me, not at Celeste, at the stage, as if he had contracted a sudden urgent need to study the podium. Renata looked at me. Her expression was the first honest thing I had seen from her in years. She was horrified. I reached up and touched the side of my head. The left side was shaved almost to the skin in two diagonal strips. The rest of my hair was intact. I looked, I would later be told, like something between a statement and an accident. I looked at Celeste. She had started to lower the clippers. The laugh had not entirely left her face, but something in my stillness had apparently not matched what she expected, because the amusement at the edges of her expression was beginning to show its seams. "We're done here," I told her, very quietly, not for the crowd, for her. The faculty volunteer reached our row. A second one had appeared from the other direction. The dean, I would learn later, had been watching from the stage. I picked up my program from the chair. I smoothed the front of my dress. I walked to the end of the row, past Douglas, who still could not seem to locate anything to look at, and I moved up the aisle toward the venue entrance. If you're still with me, stay, because what I did in the next 4 hours is the reason I am telling you this story, and the reason 500 people at that ceremony talked about it for weeks afterward. I went to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for exactly 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, not because crying would have been wrong, but because I was past it. There's a place grief goes when it has been building for long enough. It does not come out as tears, it comes out as clarity. I called Ingrid Mwangi. It was 11:57 in the morning. She answered on the second ring. Ingrid, I told her, I need to move the estate revision up. The document we discussed in February, the beneficiary restructuring. I want it finalized this week. A beat of silence. Ingrid did not ask what happened. She heard something in my voice and she understood the shape of it. I can have a draft to you by Wednesday, she told me. Tuesday, I said, another pause. Tuesday, she agreed. I sat in the car for 2 more minutes after I hung up. Then I opened my phone and drafted a text to Quame. Need to discuss the 529 account and disbursement options when you have time. Not urgent. This week. I did not send it. I held the phone in my hand and looked at the text for a moment. Then I sent it. Then I got out of the car, walked back through the venue entrance, and took my seat in the third row because there was a microphone moment approaching and I had decided that I was going to use it. By the time I returned to my seat, the diploma walk had resumed. Celeste was back in her graduate line. She was not looking in my direction. My mother reached over and pressed my hand once hard and then released it. She did not speak. Renata was staring straight ahead. Douglas had apparently found something to examine on the program. 3 rows away, a woman I did not know caught my eye. She had watched the whole thing from where she was sitting. She looked at me with an expression I recognized, the specific sympathy of a stranger who has witnessed something they cannot fix. She gave a very small nod. I nodded back. The ceremonies moved through the alphabet. When the announcer reached the S section, I raised my phone again. I watched Celeste walk across the stage. I watched her shake the dean's hand. I took the photograph. When she returned to her seat, the dean stepped back to the microphone. He had a brief announcement. He said they would be recognizing several graduates for academic honors before the ceremony concluded, and he invited those graduates' families to come to the side of the stage afterward for photographs. Celeste's name was on that list. I already knew it would be. She had told me in March. The dean began reading the honors list. I stood up. Not quickly, there was no drama in the standing, no announcement. I simply rose, stepped into the aisle, and walked to the front of the venue where the stage steps were located. A ceremony staff member started to direct me back to my seat. I told her quietly that I was the mother of one of the honors graduates and that I had a matter to address to the dean before the photographs. She looked at me specifically at the left side of my head, which I had not covered and had not attempted to explain, and she stepped aside. I walked up the stage steps. The dean was a man named Victor Adami, and I learned later that he had seen what happened from the podium and had already been considering whether to address it. He saw me come up the steps and he paused. I walked to him and I spoke quietly, close enough that only he could hear. I am Celeste Harmon's mother, I told him. What happened in the seats during your ceremony was done to me, deliberately and publicly, by my daughter. I would like to say something brief to the audience before the photographs. It is not my intention to disrupt. It is my intention to make sure that what people witnessed is not left without a response. Victor Adami looked at me for a long moment. He was a careful man. You could see it in the way his eyes moved before he spoke, scanning the situation rather than reacting to it. 1 minute, he told me. I will introduce you as a parent with remarks. He stepped to the microphone and said that before the honors photographs, a parent had requested a brief moment to address the assembly. He stepped back. I took the microphone. 500 faces looked up at me. I could see Celeste from where I stood. She was still in her seat, and she had gone very still in the way of a person who has just understood that a situation has developed past the point they controlled. Her cap was in her lap. Her hands were flat on her thighs. I looked at the audience and I took one breath. Before they announced the honors photographs, I told them, everyone here should know that my daughter, the young woman who just shaved half my head in front of this crowd, has spent 4 years at this university on an education funded by the person she just publicly humiliated. I paused for exactly 2 seconds. That education was paid for, in full, from a college fund I opened before she started kindergarten. It was funded entirely by me, managed by my financial advisor, and never touched by anyone else. I worked for every dollar in that account from a desk in a spare room while my daughter told people I had a side hustle. A sound moved through the crowd, not laughter, not outrage, something more complicated, the collective exhale of 500 people recalibrating. I have never asked for credit, I continued. I have never asked for gratitude, but I will not sit in a chair and have someone take a clipper to my head in front of your faculty and your families and your dean, and then smile while my daughter receives an award as though nothing occurred. That is the only thing I want to say. I handed the microphone back to Victor Adami. He stopped the ceremony. What happened in the 20 minutes after I came off that stage was the confrontation I had not planned, but had, in some deep structural way, been building toward for years. Victor Adami did not resume the ceremony immediately. He stepped to the microphone and said that there would be a brief pause, and he asked several staff members and Celeste to come with him to one of the venue's side rooms. He also very calmly asked me to join them. Celeste looked at me as we walked to that room, and her face had done something I had not seen from her in years. The composure was gone. Not in a dramatic way, no visible tears, no theatrical crumbling. She looked stripped. Like the expression underneath her usual expression had surfaced, and it was younger and less certain than anything she had shown me in a long time. The room was a small conference space attached to the venue's administrative suite. Victor Adami, two staff members, Celeste, and I, Renata, had followed us, which I had not expected, and the staff did not turn her away. Victor sat at the table. He looked at Celeste with the particular steadiness of a person whose institution had just been used as a backdrop for something it was never designed for. Ms. Harmon, he addressed Celeste, I need to understand what occurred. Celeste opened her mouth and then closed it. Her hand went to the tassel on her cap, which she was still holding. She turned it between her fingers once, twice. It was the first time I had seen her unable to begin a sentence. She embarrasses me, she finally said. Her voice was quiet. She's always embarrassed me. She stopped, started again. I thought it would be funny. I thought she'd just be, I didn't think she'd go to the microphone. You didn't think I would respond, I said, not as an accusation. As a clarification, she looked at me. No, why not? She turned the tassel again. Because you never do. That answer sat in the room for a moment without anyone touching it. Renata, standing near the wall, put one hand over her mouth. It was not a gesture of shock. She had already moved through shock. It was something else. Reckoning, maybe. The particular discomfort of a person who has been a comfortable bystander, suddenly understanding what their comfort enabled. Victor Adami looked between Celeste and me. He said, very evenly, Ms. Harmon, what you did to your mother during this ceremony is a matter I need to refer to the Student Conduct Office, even though you are graduating today. There may be a formal notation on your record. I also want to be clear that the honors designation you earned academically is not affected. You earned those grades. But this institution's name was attached to what happened today, and that requires a formal response. Celeste absorbed this. A small muscle in her jaw moved. Furthermore, Victor continued, and here he glanced briefly at the staff member beside him, who gave a small nod. I would ask that you take the rest of this afternoon to consider what your mother just told 500 people about how your education was funded. That is a private family matter, and I am not going to insert myself into it. But I will say that in 22 years of running graduation ceremonies, I have never seen a parent say anything more measured under a more difficult circumstance. He stood and left the room to resume the ceremony. The staff members followed. Renata did not follow. She stayed near the wall. Celeste set her cap on the table. She pressed her fingertips flat on the surface. She was looking at the table, not at me. The college fund, she said, how much was in it? $68,000 when you started, I told her. The growth over 4 years covered the rest. Her fingers pressed harder into the table. Not anger, it looked more like the physical manifestation of a number landing in a body that was not ready for it. You never told me. No. Why? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about all the years of careful non-disclosure to my mother, to Renata, to Celeste herself. I thought about the financial aid form and the way her expression had shifted and gone carefully neutral when she saw the asset numbers. Because, I told her, I wanted to see what you would do with what you knew. She finally looked up. Her eyes were dry, but the skin around them had gone tight in the way that means tears are being actively refused. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It isn't, and what you did today wasn't fair either. So here we are, Renata from the wall, Nora. Her voice came out differently than I expected, lower, stripped of its usual social polish. I need to say something, I looked at her. I knew she thought poorly of you. Renata was watching her own hands as she spoke. Not just the way kids can be dismissive, I knew she talked about you in a specific way, the side hustle comment, other things, and I never, she stopped, started over. I thought she'd grow out of it. I told myself it wasn't my business, and I never told you. I never said anything to her either. The room was quiet. I know, I told Renata. She looked up. You knew? I've known for a long time what the room thinks of me, I said. I made a choice about what to do with that information. You made a different choice. We're both going to have to live with ours. Renata set her fork down very slowly, except there was no fork. It was a phantom gesture, her hand falling to her side and stopping in the air for a moment, fingers slightly curved, like a habit interrupted. She looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her in possibly 20 years. Wide open, no performance in it. I'm sorry, she said, the word had weight. It was not the social apology, the smooth, reflexive one she deployed at dinner parties when she'd made an incorrect assumption. This one cost something, I could hear it. I know, I said again, and I meant it differently this time. Celeste was watching this exchange with the particular attention of someone who has just understood that a conversation she was not invited into has been going on around her for years. "What happens now?" she asked. Her voice was quiet. "Now," I told her, "you go take your photographs. You earned your degree. That part is yours." She stood slowly. She picked up her cap. She put it on and straightened the tassel with both hands, and for just a moment she looked 22 years old and tired and young in a way that was almost unbearable. "Mom," she said at the door. I waited. "I didn't know," she said. "About the fund, about all of it, I really didn't know." "I understand. That's not an excuse." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." She left the room. Renata followed after a moment, pausing at the door to look back at me once, a look that carried everything she had not said for the past 10 years, and then she was gone too. I stood alone in the conference room for a moment. Outside, through the wall, I could hear the ceremony resuming, the announcer's voice, applause scattered and warm. I reached up and touched the left side of my head again. The shaved patch was clean-edged, precise, actually. My daughter had done it evenly. I almost laughed. Then I straightened my dress, walked back out through the side door, and found my seat in the third row, next to my mother, who took my hand without a word and held it through the rest of the ceremony. The honors photographs happened after the general ceremony concluded. Celeste's name was called with 7 other graduates. I stood at the side of the stage with the other families, and I took photographs on my phone and I clapped when her name was read. My mother stood beside me and cried, not quietly, in the generous, shoulder-shaking way she cries at things that matter. Renata stood on my other side. She did not cry. She watched Celeste on the stage with an expression that was doing several things at once, and when the photographs were done and Celeste came toward us, Renata stepped forward first and hugged her niece for a long time and said nothing. There was a lunch reservation that afternoon at a restaurant Renata had chosen. We went, all of us. I am aware that sounds implausible, given what had preceded it, but grief and celebration are less incompatible than people assume. My mother ordered the salmon. Douglas had steak. Renata and I both had the same pasta dish without either of us noticing until it arrived, and she gave a short, exhausted laugh and I echoed it, and it was the most natural thing that had happened between us in years. Celeste sat across from me. She spoke mostly to her grandmother through the meal. When she spoke to me, it was in the careful, calibrated way of a person who is aware they are walking on new terrain and does not yet know where the solid ground is. She asked if I wanted to try her appetizer. I said yes. She passed the plate. It was not resolution. It was not even close to resolution. But it was the beginning of a different kind of conversation, and I had stopped expecting the conversations to be anything other than what they were. That evening, back at my hotel, I followed up with Ingrid Mwangi by email. I told her the graduation had occurred and that my decision about the estate documents was unchanged. She confirmed receipt. I also sent a brief message to Quame noting that I wanted to schedule a call about the 529 account disbursement options, specifically what the process would look like now that Celeste had graduated, and whether the remaining balance could be structured as a conditional gift. I did not make any decisions that night. I gathered information. Then I ordered room service, ate dinner sitting on the hotel bed in my graduation dress with the left side of my hair still shaved, and watched something entirely unremarkable on the television until I fell asleep. 3 days after the graduation, Ingrid sent the revised estate documents for my review. The beneficiary restructuring was clean and clear. I went through every page, asked 2 questions, and signed on Thursday morning. The documents were filed by end of business that day. 6 days after the graduation, Victor Adami's office sent a formal letter to Celeste's permanent address, mine, which was still her listed address of record, confirming the student conduct review process and notifying her of a formal notation that would accompany her transcript for 2 years. It was not an expulsion. It was not a revocation of honors. It was a documented record that something had occurred, and it would require her disclosure on any graduate school application or professional licensing process that asked about conduct incidents. The letter was professional and impartial. It said exactly what it needed to say. Celeste called me when she received it. "I got the letter," she said. "I know." A pause on her end. "Did you request this?" "No. Victor Adami runs his institution the way he sees fit. I didn't ask him for anything." Another pause, her voice was careful. "It's going to affect my applications." "It might," I told her. "It also might not, depending on how you address it. It could become a story about accountability and growth. That part is up to you." She was quiet for a long moment, then, "I have to explain what I did." "Yes, to people who will judge me for it." "Yes," I heard her breath. "I know I owe you more than an apology." "You owe yourself more than an apology," I said. "I'm not the primary person harmed by what kind of person you've been becoming." She did not have an answer to that. Neither did I really, not one that fit into a phone call. We agreed to have dinner in 3 weeks. She said she would come to me. I said that was fine. Renata called 2 days after Celeste called. She asked if we could have lunch, just the two of us, no occasion, no celebration. I said yes. We met at a place near her house on a Tuesday afternoon in June, and she talked for most of the meal in a way I had never heard her talk before, without managing the impression she was making, without shaping the narrative toward a favorable landing. She told me that she had spoken to Celeste twice since the graduation and had said things she should have said years earlier. She told me she had also spoken to Douglas about the way the family had collectively treated me, and that Douglas had said less than she expected and seemed more thoughtful than usual. She did not ask me to forgive her in so many words. She asked if I would keep having lunch with her. I said I would. My mother sent me a card in the mail, a physical card, handwritten, that said three things: that she was proud of me, that she was sorry she had not done better, and that she had told Douglas's contact at the relocation firm that her daughter did not need any introductions after all. That last line was her way of being funny. I kept the card. As for me, I am still consulting. The Greensboro property sold in September for considerably more than its acquired value, and my share of that sale was handled by Ingrid and distributed cleanly. I have two active clients and am in preliminary conversations with a third. I work from my desk in the spare room, and I no longer take calls in my car to avoid questions, because there is no one in my house to ask them. The left side of my hair grew back in 10 weeks. I went to a stylist on the second week of June, and she shaped everything around it with a cropped cut that I have kept since. Several people have told me it looks deliberately modern. I do not correct them. Celeste and I had dinner in late June as planned. She came to my house and I made pasta, and we talked for 3 hours, and some of it was hard, and some of it was quiet, and none of it was resolved in the way that a resolution feels complete. But something had shifted under the surface of our dynamic. The old architecture, the one where she managed me and I kept my own counsel, had been demolished. We were building something without a blueprint, which is slower and more uncertain, and the only way to build something that actually lasts. She enrolled in a graduate program in the fall. She addressed the conduct notation in her application essay. She told me what she wrote. I did not offer edits. Quame and I spoke about the 529 disbursement in late July. The remaining balance, a little over $14,000, was still in the account. After the conversation, I directed it toward a 6-month travel fund I told Celeste she could access once she had completed her first graduate semester. No conditions beyond that. She found out about it in October and called me, and for the first time in longer than I could track, she cried on the phone. Not performatively. The real kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere involuntary. I did not tell her it was a gesture of reconciliation. I told her it was a remainder from an account I had opened when she was in kindergarten, and that it was hers, and that I hoped she used it to go somewhere she had never been. She said she would. I believe her. So, did I go too far, or not far enough? Tell me in the comments.